How's it going? Chuck Hewitt here from QuietKat e-bikes. Today we're going to talk about assembling our 2024 Apex XD. Before we crack open our new bike, let's just do a quick inspection. Make sure we look at the outside of the box and check for any shipping damage. If there's any holes or damage to the box, make sure you take a couple pictures and make a note of that. Once we open up our box, let's peek inside. Again, we'll do the same thing, checking for any shipping damage or any holes in the box. This bike looks pretty good. We can go ahead and right away reach in, grab our accessory box. We'll set that aside. We should also find our charger. We'll set that box aside as well. We can remove some of this packaging on top of the bike. These bikes are packed in pretty well. We'll set that packaging aside for now. You should find on our XD the integrated rear rack sitting right on top of the bike. Get that packaging aside here, and let's set that rear rack aside. Once we've removed a good chunk of the packaging, we're ready to lift the bike out of the box. Lifting the bikes out of the box can be done by yourself, but it's best to find a friend and get them to help you out. Perfect. We'll set the bike on the ground just in front of the box. If you can, have your friend help you hold the bike. And before I put this bike in the stand, I'm going to go ahead and cut that front wheel free of the bike. Just taking care that I don't cut the tire itself. If you don't have a bike stand, that's okay. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to put the bike in the stand so it's a little bit easier to see what we're doing and how to assemble the bike. With the bike in the stand, we just want to go ahead and cut all of the packaging away. Again, make sure you take a little extra time so you don't scratch the frame or cut any wires by accident. You'll find some of our bikes have a plastic film coating over the frame. We'll go ahead and remove that as well. So our 2024 Apex HD ships with the fork compressed. So you'll find a ratchet strap here on the front fork. To release this, I'm just going to pull that lever, spin it up into a vertical position. You'll see that cam strap let go and the fork fully extend. With all the packaging removed from our bike, it's time to start putting it together. First thing we're going to do is install the handlebars. Before we start assembling our bike, you can grab your accessory box. You can go ahead and open that up. Inside of your accessory box, you should find your owner's manual, user's guide, and a bunch of tools along with your pedals to help you assemble the bike. To install the handlebars on the bike, first we need to remove the faceplate of the stem. We'll use a 4mm Allen key, and we'll go ahead and take all 4 of those bolts out. With the faceplate of the stem removed, we can grab our handlebars. You may have to spin your display just a little bit to line it up in there. We know we have the handlebars on correctly if we have our twist throttle on the right-hand side and the keypad to our display on the left-hand side. We can move some of these wires out of the way. I like to get one of those top bolts started to hold the faceplate on, just like that. Then I'll grab the other 4 bolts and just get them started. Once I have all 4 bolts started into the stem, I want to tighten them down equally. I'll line the handlebars up into the approximate correct position. We can double check it later. And I'll go ahead and tighten down all 4 of those bolts on the stem faceplate. Perfect. So our next step will be installing the front wheel. Before we can install the front wheel, we need to remove the front axle. I'm going to use a 6mm Allen key, and I can spin this axle end cap off of one side. I like to take it off of the drive side. Then I'm going to use a 4mm to loosen the pinch bolts on the axle. With all the bolts loose, I can slide this axle out of the fork, just like this. And I want to make sure to remove that shipping plastic between the brake pads. If you haven't already, go ahead and remove the shipping plastic from your front wheel. I'm going to make sure I have the rotor on the brake side, and I'm going to slide this front wheel up into the fork. I can watch the rotor slide between the brake pads, and I can pull the wheel up into the fork. I'll grab my front axle, slide it in, just like that, onto the drive side. I can slide it in, starting on that non-drive side, then I can spin it around and line up the fork on the non-drive side and push that axle the rest of the way through. With the axle all the way through the wheel and into the fork, I can take that axle end cap and I'm going to tighten that back down with my 6mm Allen key. Just like so. Finally, I'm going to take my 4mm Allen key and tighten down all 4 pinch bolts on that front axle. I'm going to tighten these together and try to tighten them equally. That's the front wheel installed on our bike. Next up for this bike is installing the rear rack. You'll notice that this particular bike doesn't have a rear fender installed already. The fender will come installed on all of our bikes. This is a pre-production run, so we're going to show you how to do that on the Apex HD. We'll remove the rest of the packaging from our rear rack. You can see we have a little packaging to help protect it in transport. We'll toss that aside. And on the rack we'll also find the hardware kit. So let's cut that hardware kit off and set that aside as well. Our 2024 racks slide into the frame really easily. You can see we'll line up these 4 notches and that frame will sit right in with the rack. From the hardware kit, we're going to grab our 4 M8 bolts and we're going to go ahead and start those. We'll just get the threads started, finger tight, on all 4 bolts. Once those are started, I'll grab my 5mm Allen key and just put them about halfway in. Before I tighten down the M8 bolts, I'm going to find the M5 bolt from the hardware kit and the spacer. This spacer is going to set between the fender and the rack of the bike. I'm going to go ahead and line that up. You'll notice the fender is actually threaded, and I will slide that M5 bolt through the spacer down to the fender, and I'll tighten that down with a 4mm Allen key. Once the fender is tight, I can go ahead and tighten those M8 bolts that hold the rack to the frame of the bike the rest of the way. Next up, we'll take the pedals out of our accessory box and install them on the bike. You'll notice that the pedals are stamped. They have a sticker that says right and left. The pedals are specific to the drive side or the non-drive side of the bike, so make sure you put the right on the right side and the left on the left side. If you have a little bit of bicycle grease around, you can use it. It's always good to put a little bit on each thread of the pedals. Again, we're going to make sure we install that right pedal on the right side. That's going to be a right-hand thread, so we'll spin it to the right to tighten it. I'll get it started there, and then I'll take the left pedal around to the left side. Remember, our left pedal is a left-hand thread, so I'm going to turn it to the left to tighten it into the crank. Next, I'll grab my 15mm wrench or a pedal wrench, and I'm going to go ahead and snug these pedals down. Again, that's right on the right pedal and left on the left pedal. Now we're ready to install the battery on our bike. First, we're going to need to find the keys. The keys should be zip tied to the handlebars. Go ahead and clip those. I'm going to take my key and I'm going to insert it into the lock core on the non-drive side of the bike and make sure that that key is turned to the left. Now I'm ready to grab my battery. All of our 2024 bikes use the KP battery in a 30 amp hour or 15 amp hour size. Let's go ahead and open it up. Once we've got our battery removed, I'm going to make sure that those blades, there's 8 of them on this battery, are pointed down towards the bottom of the bike. I'm going to slide it into the frame, bottom first, then it will click back up into the down tube, and I can turn that key to the right to lock it and remove the key. While I have this bike in the stand, I can tell the tire pressure is just a little bit low. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little air to the tires. We like to run our tires between 12 and 20 PSI, depending on the conditions you want to ride in. Front looks good, and our tires are set. All right, now that we have our bike fully assembled, it's always best to do one final check and make sure that all of the bolts are tight on our bike. I like to start from the front of the bike and work my way back. I'm going to check and make sure that that stem is nice and tight. I know that those faceplate bolts are tight from our check earlier. I know that I also tightened down the front axle and pinch bolts. The seat clamp, I'm going to make sure that the seat clamp is nice and tight. I'll make sure that my rack is secure. I'm going to make sure that my dropout bolts are tight. Always good to make sure that that axle bolt is tight as well. I also like to check the crank bolts when I first assemble that bike to make sure that my crank bolt on both sides is tightened correctly. We'll also check those chainring bolts, make sure those are secure. Looks like everything is snug and secure on this bike and it's ready to ride. Remember, after you build your bike, after the first ride or two, to double check all the bolts once again. It's pretty normal as you break in your bike for things to settle in, and it's always a good idea to recheck all of those bolts after a few rides. That concludes our video on assembling the 2024 Apex XD. Make sure to check out QuietKat.com for additional videos on how to install accessories, maintain, and tune your bike.